Hello, I'm Dave Litton, and a very warm welcome to you and my brand new Project Management Primer. Now, as you can see, this has been designed as a general purpose introduction to project management, but specifically as a training support tool for all those who wish to take the examination for the APM, the Association of Project Managers Introductory Certificate in Project Management. Now, this primer has been designed against the 27 topic areas outlined in the Introductory Certificate in Project Management syllabus. Just a little word about the exam. Please be clear, you'll have to obviously make your own arrangements to take the exam if you wish to, but it's worthwhile just mentioning that it's a 1-hour exam, it's multi-choice, and it has 60 questions. To obtain the pass mark in this exam, you must score at least 60%. Which is getting 36 questions correct. It won't be a surprise, of course, for you to know that because I've designed this against the Introductory Certificate syllabus, and I have included, therefore, many multiple choice questions very similar to those that you will encounter in the actual exam itself. So as a result of going through the various modules and checking your progress, you'll be fairly confident that if you're getting good marks in my exams, then you'll get good marks in the Introductory Certificate exam itself. Now, I've split the primer into 7 modules, each containing several of the syllabus areas. The idea being here is that you can take each module at a time, and you can choose your own time when you can take them. You may well find, much like me possibly, that you think and study better first thing in the morning. I would recommend that you put by at least 30 minutes to an hour for each session. Each module, of course, will be a different length in time, and you may find that if you have just got half an hour or an hour, then you might find it best to choose an appropriate module. I recommend most strongly that you carry out the modules in strict number order, starting with this one, module 1, of course, right through to module 7. I think you'll find that's a more natural sequence for taking on board and understanding fully the APM syllabus. If you wish to go further than the Introductory Certificate, I will, in due time, be creating and launching an APMP primer for the more advanced students. Okay, so let's get stuck straight in. First of all, starting with the definition of a project. Projects bring about change, and project management is recognized as the most effective way of managing such change. Now, projects are unique. This is what makes them different to perhaps an operational job which you may have had in your past life. Projects are unique. They've never happened before. You may have had similar projects, but each project is unique in some way. They are transient endeavors, meaning they have a beginning and an end, they don't go on forever, and they're undertaken to achieve a desired outcome. Now, this word is quite important. An outcome is the result of some change. You see, projects are there to deliver change, and as a result of the change, you will get some outcome that you're looking for. This outcome over a period of time will deliver benefits. So at its simplest, a project consists of activities done to meet specific change objectives. So see it this way. A project produces deliverables, or products as they're sometimes called. A deliverable is anything the project delivers, and a product is anything the project produces. So as you can see, they are both the same thing. But projects aren't there just to spend money and produce deliverables. The objective, of course, is to use those, that's your outcome as a result of change, to deliver over a period of time business benefits. Now, these new products or deliverables that a project produces might be a new service, or it might be some improvement over some system that you've currently got, and the project is there to make it more effective in some way. And as you might imagine, because projects deliver change, and as such, therefore, there must be some uncertainty, or several uncertainties. And here, of course, I'm talking about risk. So every project will have some element of risk contained in it, simply because you're changing something. Now, projects don't get done on their own. You'll be familiar, of course, with the fact that you need a project manager. And the project manager's job is to handle, juggle, and prioritize many factors in order to deliver the project. That's deliver the project end product, of course. And that these prioritizations and the many factors must be agreed by the sponsor, the project sponsor. Now, we'll talk more about what this sponsor is, but for now, just see it as the business owner, if you will. Traditionally, a project manager is seen as managing the project within certain constraints. And traditionally, they used to be called TCQ, standing for time, cost, and quality. Sometimes these terms, time, known as schedule, cost, known as budget, and quality, performance. And within every project, meeting it within these constraints, you also have what's known as scope. That is the work that needs to be done to actually achieve the time, cost, and quality objectives. Now, the definition of scope within a project is what's included and what isn't. In other words, scope focuses on the boundaries. Imagine if you're having a house built. You might be discussing with the builder about how many bedrooms, the size of bathrooms, the plot size, the size of the garden, and so on and so forth. And here you'll be talking about the products or deliverables that you expect within the project. But one of the problems with projects, when they go wrong that is that when you come to the end of the project and hand over the end deliverable or product, the customer is not happy with what you've done, and they may disagree about what you should have done but haven't done. This usually results in not having a clear understanding of what the scope is of the project, what's included and what isn't. And you can see this is like a very simple equation. If you remember those from way back at school, you had the left-hand side of an equation had to balance the right-hand side. So I suppose you could say for a given scope of a project, here's when we need it, here's the budget you're having, and here's what we consider as adequate quality coming out of the project, or performance, if you will. Now, we'll obviously clarify some of these terms a little later, but can you see, here's the left-hand side of the equation, and these are on the right-hand side. So it sounds like for the equation to balance, there seems to be a natural point. That is, for a given scope, if that's what's absolutely non-negotiable, then of the remaining three, only two of them can be stated. The third one, whichever one it is, has to be as a result of the other two. For example, if you said the scope is this house needs to have 6 bedrooms, just to use one aspect, I want it delivered by December, I have a budget of £500,000, lucky you, then you really then can't talk about the quality. For example, I want gold leaf in the bedrooms and I want a jacuzzi along with the ensuite. You're really talking now about something that isn't possible. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 variables. One of them must always be as the result of the other 3. This is called prioritization that I'm touching on here. And it's important at the very beginning of the project to make sure your sponsor and you fully agree on what's in, on what's out, and what the variables are. Put another way around, the sponsor could say, I want it by this date, I have this budget in terms of quality, and they'll lay out some attributes, and then it's up to you to say, here's what I can give you within those constraints. If you've had a house built ever, it doesn't matter if you haven't, then consider quality perhaps for how straight the walls are, the fact that you've got no cracks at all anywhere. I think if you have had a new house built, you'll know that it's quite natural and normal for some settlement to occur. So in discussing quality, just to use an example of the quality of the plaster work and paint work, one would expect some small amounts of cracks, and it's a matter of saying which is acceptable. So for a given amount of quality, then you'd know what the time and cost and scope is, and therefore make a prioritization. If you're delivering a piece of equipment for the medical industry, then obviously as soon as they can get it, the sooner they can start, let's imagine, saving lives. As cheap as you can make it means they can supply one to each hospital. And the scope, we want to include a number of features of this, let's imagine, piece of equipment, which leaves us with quality. If you're using a piece of equipment to help save lives, then clearly it must work, it mustn't break down. So I would put to you that in prioritizing, using an example of a piece of medical equipment, quality would come first. Yes, as soon as we can get it, the sooner we can start using it, and so on and so forth, but quality would come first. Agreeing that with the sponsor would allow you, the project manager, to then produce a realistic and achievable plan, knowing what the priorities are. So the bottom line is that you'll often need to come to an agreement where there is some trade-off made between time, cost, quality and scope. This has various names. Sometimes it's called the Holy Triangle, although there's nothing at all religious about it. Sometimes it's called the Iron Triangle, or the Project Manager's Trilemma. However, I've got some bad news for you, and that's that as project management has matured and advanced, modern day projects and the project managers see that in fact it's not just these, it's actually 5 aspects. Here's time and cost and quality and scope, and the 5th is risk. Do you remember I said whenever you deliver change there'll be some amount of uncertainty? This of course is risk. Some projects are more risky than others, and risk, would you agree, could impact any of the remaining ones. In fact, let me take that further. Scope could change or impact or influence any of the other ones. So I want you to see these as interactive. These are often known as the performance factors of a project, and these in effect you could see as constraints within which the project must be delivered. Without agreement of what the priority is of these constraints, then you're going to save up trouble later. So it's important, well before you do planning, that you understand what the priorities of these 5 are. Now, as I said earlier, the whole purpose of producing projects and spending all the time and money and sweat and blood and toil is actually to deliver a capability. This is the new product, the end product or deliverable that will give you the change you need. And ultimately these capabilities over time will give you benefits. Now don't confuse benefits with features, for example. A feature of a product is what it has or is. A benefit is what it does. Now, as you're probably aware, the world seems to be changing at an ever constant rate. And one of the reasons why projects are becoming more and more important is simply some of these ideas. As markets become more competitive, as the internet, for example, shrinks the world and information is everywhere, then companies and organizations need to change in order to remain competitive and ensure that their products are marketable. Technology is growing rapidly as well, and as a result of that, new projects need to be launched to actually put in place the latest technologies. For example, help desks, e-commerce and so on and so forth. Just using IT as an example. Globalization. As the world in effect shrinks, then organizations need to grow and to adapt. And even when you talk about local organizations, a family store, for example, in your local high street will need still to remain competitive. Take a small corner shop, for example, needing to remain competitive for perhaps a new supermarket that's opened up. Then they have put in place new products, perhaps update their store to make it more easy to buy and purchase from, and so on and so forth. So this is why projects are becoming more and more important in our busy world. Let's take the Association of Project Management Helicopter View. As I've just said, projects are there because of the need to change. And project management is all about controlling the introduction of these desired changes. And this is a simple model showing you how this all works. First, the inputs, of course. This comes from the reasons of needing to change, either because of a business need to resolve a problem or an opportunity to perhaps create a different set of products. This in effect becomes the trigger which causes the project to start. The outputs of the project are of course the deliverables or products, as I've already mentioned, or it might be services and some form of change. Now the project manager is responsible for managing completion of these deliverables. In the previous slide I introduced the idea of constraints, and here they are again: time, cost and quality, technical and other performance parameters. For example, a constraint might be a legal constraint or something to do with your environment. We'll talk about something called PESTLE later on. So the project manager has to manage the project, but within these given constraints. Now, the mechanisms are what we use to actually create the outputs. People, they're the specialist team members, using special techniques, using tools, equipment and of the organization. You can see mechanisms as being the resources, if you will. So this is the trigger. Here's the project manager managing it within the constraints as we've seen, and here are the resources that carry out the work and effort that produce the products. Now here's a term I want to get you very used to. Projects are different to business as usual, or BAU as it's called. Don't worry, we'll discuss this in a later slide. If you come into work and you run a department or a group, that would be called business as usual. It's not a project, as we'll see. Every day you have different challenges, but every day you come in and you have the same job, normally within the same organization with the same people that you'd normally deal with. And this is called business as usual. A project, however, is there to deliver change. Therefore, the output of a project must go into business as usual. This might be your customer's business as usual, by the way, or it might be inside your organization. And let's talk about that right now. Let's start off by looking at the characteristics, if you will, of a project. Every project is unique in some way. You may have projects which have been similar to previous, but they'll be different, I can assure you, whether it's the type of risk, the resources used, the features of the products, the time frame, the delivery area, and so on and so forth. Projects have a beginning and an end, therefore they are temporary. They never go on forever. Projects normally have different teams to those in business as usual. You'll often find projects use cross-functional teams, so that you may be drawing on people from other departments or groups that come together under this banner of a temporary project to perform the job of creating the products, and when the project disbands, then the team go back to their original areas. Indeed, teams may be part-time. You may have an individual working on several projects, and their original departmental area, to use that word, where they come from, they'll always be part of that team. They're merely seconded on your project until it's finished. Projects introduce step changes, going from the old to the new. Remember, the new will be some new thing or situation as a result of your end product. If you just like to see a product as you purchasing a new car, that would be an example of a step change. On Monday morning you have your old car, by Monday evening you now have your new car. Projects will use temporary resources, as I said, usually taken from other parts of the organisation. And because all projects introduce change, they will always have areas of uncertainty. So the mindset is being risk aware. We know we're taking something through change, we know there are risks, we're keeping an eye on them, we are taking appropriate actions, and we're aware of the risks. The products coming out of a project deliver, of course, into business as usual, as I've already mentioned. And there are constraints, if you will, or performance aspects of each project: time, cost, quality, scope, and risk. Compare and contrast that, if you will, to business as usual. Now, again, perhaps it might help you to have a mindset of perhaps some departmental manager or a member of their team that you might be familiar with in your workplace. As I've said, they are usually a permanent member of that team. What they do every day, although is different and challenging, it is to a certain extent repetitive, and I mean that in a positive sense. So if you're there to provide support to a help desk, that's what you do. Your manager and yourself in your job in business as usual will want to optimize what you do. Now, I mentioned that Projex, the end product, will deliver into business as usual. So you might have a project that's producing some new computer system that helps to optimize the way business as usual runs its business. The resources are permanent and they're stable. Business as usual is risk averse. Can you see the difference here? With projects, we know risks and uncertainty are there. We're there to manage them. But if you're running a department, the last thing you want is risks. You, as a manager of that department, would want to do everything you could to make sure the departmental day-by-day machinations run smoothly with no problems. And therefore, in business as usual, the management aspects are keeping the operational process running smoothly. The manager will want to optimize time and reduce inefficiencies. Again, if you're just running a help desk, for example, then you'd want to make sure that it works effectively. In business as usual, you'd want to budget and make sure that you run your department to budget. You'd want to contain costs and scope to make sure you understand exactly what you do and what you don't do. You'd want to maintain quality to make sure that the services, whatever it is you're providing, are of a high standard, and you will obviously want to be continually improving the process, making it smarter and more efficient. And it's the business as usual that uses the end products from the projects to realize benefits. Again, this business as usual might be within your own company, or it might be your customer, and it is they that are using your end product from your project to realize some form of benefits. So in a nutshell, business as usual optimizes the repetition of operations. Let's now look at the many talents needed for a project manager. The project manager needs to understand what the stakeholders want, and a stakeholder is anyone with an interest in the project. This would include naturally your customers or users, as well as management and members of the project team themselves. The project manager needs to plan what work needs to be done. So the project manager needs to understand how planning occurs, what a plan looks like. There are soft skills as well that the project manager needs to have, and that's building and motivating the team. One of the modules we'll be covering will talk about these so-called soft skills. After all, it's no point having a project manager who just remorselessly drives through time, cost, quality, scope, manages the benefits, manages the risks, and so on and so forth, when you've got the team feeling very highly demotivated. They won't work so well. So the project manager needs to make sure that the team develops naturally and works in a high-performance way. The project manager needs to know when and by whom and to what standards the work needs to be done. The project manager needs to have the skills to coordinate the work of different people, sometimes internally within the organization, others in external, perhaps third-party or suppliers organizations as well. The project manager also needs to understand how work is progressing, monitoring and ensuring that the actual progress is going according to the plan. And of course, like most things in life, that doesn't always happen. So the other thing the project manager has to ensure is that he or she takes action to make sure the project keeps on track. This infers, therefore, if the work isn't being done to plan, let's suppose it's coming in late, then the project manager would want to take some action to bring it back on schedule. Within every project, there will be changes. These changes may come externally to your organization. They could come from just about anybody. And the project manager needs to manage change. You may have heard of the term scope creep, and this is where projects come in late and over budget as a result of very small, seemingly innocent changes, and they aren't being done under control. Ultimately, one morning everyone wakes up and realizes the project is horribly over budget and is going to come in late. So the project manager must manage change. It's not as hard as you think. Managing change simply means if, for example, the customer changes their mind, and they are quite entitled to do so, then the project manager would want to look at the impact and make sure the appropriate level of authority, usually the sponsor, is involved in agreeing or otherwise that this change should go ahead. The project manager has to meet the project objectives, whatever they are. Remember, time, cost, quality, scope, and so on. And ensure that the project delivers successful results. Now be careful here. The project manager is there to ensure that the project produces the end deliverables or products which have the capability or potential of realizing the business benefits. Once the project's finished, the project manager has no direct control over whether those products go on to deliver the benefits. It's a bit like you buying a new car with the potential to perhaps transport your family in a very efficient manner, but keeping it in the garage. So be aware of that. So projects bring about change, and project management is recognized as the most efficient way of managing such change. Let's just have a look at the term management. This is the process of leading the team, planning, producing plans, organizing the work and the people, controlling the resources, that's obtaining them, making sure the work's going well and that you've got the right level of skills and that products are being created to the appropriate quality of the organization to achieve stated goals as productively as possible. There's a great definition of the word management. So project management is the process by which projects are defined in the first place, then planned, then monitored and controlled, ultimately and delivered. There's the deliverables, such that over time the agreed benefits are realized. Now let's talk about project management processes. Now a process is, well, baking a cake, I suppose, if you saw that as a process. It turns inputs into outputs. You start off with flour, water, eggs, etc., and it turns into a cake as a result of you baking it. So a process has an input and an output. Now in project management, we can see the same thing happens. You'll always want some starting process. This is normally to define what needs to be done and get that agreed. And then we have the plan process, where we produce a plan of some description. This plan is reviewed and signed off and approved. And now we're into the monitoring process. The monitoring process is monitoring actual progress against what the plan says. Now, things very rarely go to plan. That's the nature of projects. So the control process is taking some form of corrective action to bring the project back on track. And projects should use learning or continuous improvement. At the end of particular points within the project, for example at the end of a stage or phase, and also at the end of the project, learnings should be captured and implemented so that future projects can take advantage of these. However, we haven't quite finished. We produce a plan, we monitor progress against it, and we control to take some form of change actions to bring it back on track. As a result of that, normally you'd want to update the plan or replan so that now we've got a new plan against which to monitor and control, and so the circle continues. People are often confused about the fact that once a plan is signed off, it should be under version control. However, it should be a living document. If you're taking a journey from point A to point B and partway through it's clear you need to take a different route, then wouldn't you want to update a plan and follow that new route? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here. However, once the project has produced the final end product, then we need some form of closing process. This is to ensure a controlled shutdown and to make sure that the end product is handed over to business as usual. So let's talk about those characteristics of a project again. Every project is unique. A project is temporary. A project is there to deliver and to meet certain objectives. A project contains risk and hence levels of uncertainty that need to be managed. A project always exists within certain constraints, time or cost or one of the others. And projects will often draw on people from other parts of the organisation or even third-party organisations, so that it will be a cross-functional project in that the team on the project will come from different parts of your organisation. That is not a necessity, but it may often happen. So let's summarise where we've got to. Projects are required because of some need, a problem that needs to be solved, or an opportunity. It may be a customer asking for a new whatever. And that project management is the process by which projects are defined, planned, monitored progress, controlled, taking controlled action, and ultimately delivered, so that, once the project's finished usually, that at some point benefits are realised from the end product. We know that whatever triggers the start of a project, there'll need to be a business case which contains those benefits. We'll talk more about a business case much later, but for now see a business case as being some document, normally, a set of scales if you will, balancing benefits on one side and cost and risk on the other. And if a business case is viable, it means that the benefits are worth the costs and risk. That's putting it fairly simply. We'll also learn later about success criteria, those metrics which must be met for the project to be considered successful, often called acceptance criteria as well. And within the business case, of course, we have the benefits, which should be known and understood at the very beginning. Think about it. If you don't know what the benefits you're trying to achieve, how do you know what products or deliverables are required? Project is delivered with certain constraints. I've mentioned here scope, time, cost and quality. And the project plan is created based upon these requirements and these constraints, or performance constraints if you will. The plan is signed off once resources have been assigned, and usually the sponsor will then sign the plan off. A point worth making: some people think that a schedule is a plan. Well, a plan is a document, and I'd like you to start thinking of it that way. It has schedules or time frames in it, it has activities, it has deliverables, but it also has resources, human or non-human, required to undertake the activities to create the deliverables or products. So, having created it, assigning resources, now the plan needs to be authorised. Now, of course, the project manager's main job, through managing the project, having got the planning done, is to give out the work that will result in the creation of the products. The project manager's job is to monitor progress against the plan, to manage the creation of these deliverables and the team themselves, and to control whenever necessary to take corrective action to ensure the project remains on track. Ultimately, all this will lead to the deliverables or the products being now placed into business as usual, and the project is finished. Now, the term you need to define and understand is the project life cycle. In your organisation, you may well find different names given for some of these, but it's important you understand that a project needs to start, it has a middle where you create the products, and it has an end. That is at its simplest a project life cycle. Normally, you'll come across these names, and so I want you to remember these different phases which I'm going to introduce to you. Phases can also be called the initiation phase, planning phase and execution. And each phase needs to go through its own project management phases or stages. Well, that probably has confused you, so let's show you the diagram. The first phase is called the concept phase, and you can see here planning, monitoring, controlling and replanning as a cyclic activity. Now, the concept phase is normally where an outline business case is developed, fairly simple, to understand what exactly the project is all about. This will then lead to the definition phase, again, planning, monitoring, controlling and replanning, where the project management plan is created. I now want you to get used to the words we shall use here. We don't just call it a plan, we call it the Project Management Plan, PMP. So get used to that phrase. Having got the Project Management Plan created and signed off, we're now into the implementation phase. Again, planning, monitoring, controlling and replanning. And often the implementation phase, which is where you create your products or deliverables, will often be split into optional stages. You may have heard people talk about the design stage, the development stage, the test stage, the handover stage, or whatever. Implementation, however, is where all of the work carries on to create the products or deliverables. So the concept is getting the basic idea of what this project's about. Definition is doing the planning. Implementation is doing the delivery. And you probably guessed the final one, therefore, is where you hand over the end products and close out the project. So get used to these 4 terms here. Burn them into your memory. They are the different phases of the project life cycle. Now you may be thinking, why not just have a beginning and an end and the bit in between for a project? But the problems that may well bring, apart from the very simplest of projects, is that you've lost a lot of control. By splitting any large activity down into more manageable chunks, such as we're doing here, called phases, then you have better control over the project. So let's start to look at some of the advantages of the project life cycle. So here's the benefits of splitting a project into phases and or stages. There's a very old phrase called "How do you eat an elephant?" and the answer is one small piece at a time. Rather an unsavoury thought, I know, but it does demonstrate clearly why it's important to take a project and to split it into phases and stages. It makes each of these phases or stages more manageable. It makes sure that early phases are not ignored. Let me go back to the previous slide. It's very easy for someone to come up with a concept and then start making stuff without firmly understanding what needs to be defined, producing the project management plan and the detailed business case. It treats each phase as a mini project, again, much like I've inferred here, by having planning, monitoring, controlling and replanning. If you will, you can see that this is where this mini project starts and here's where it finishes. Assists in project planning, because if you think about it, you could do a fairly high level plan of the whole of the project and then produce stage or phase plans as you go through each of these. You could have a stage plan for stage 1, a stage plan for S2 and so on and so forth. If you're having a house built, and let's imagine it's going to take 1 year, then what's the point of planning something 9 months out? You don't know whether that's going to happen when you think it is, whether the people are going to be the same people, and you may not have a clear understanding of what particular products are. Imagine designing a kitchen on a house not yet built. So it's far better to produce a top-level project management plan and then split it into stages. So as you finish S2 and go into S3, you can take the high-level detail here and for the first time plan it in lower-level detail. So assists in the project planning. Resource allocation. Again, you may not know who needs to be involved in the third stage here when you're back here or here. So plan it at a high level detail, and then when you get closer to stage 3, then and only then can you start being very precise about what resources you need and when you need them. It gives you a better chance of scheduling more realistically. Again, rather than just guessing at the beginning here about what you think is going to happen. Remember, the word scheduling really just means timing. It's when activities are scheduled to start and to finish. And of course, estimating. Again, by estimating at a fairly high level here in the project management plan, as you go through the different stages, then you can estimate at lower level details, something called bottom up, which we'll discuss much later. Encourages interim project reviews and facilitates go or no-go decision making. So, could you see that if you get to the end of stage 1 here, then the project sponsor would want to check that the project is still on track, that the business case is still viable, that the risks are still acceptable, and if you are producing stage plans, would want to produce a stage plan and the sponsor would want to approve it. Thereby, at the end of each one of these points, it would be an end stage assessment or business review. Much like a traffic light system, where the sponsor would make a decision whether the project should proceed to the next stage or not. So encourages interim project reviews and facilitates go, no-go decision making. So let's look at those different phases again in a linear left to right diagram. So the first phase is called concept, sometimes called initiation. The definition phase, sometimes called planning. Now in concept, the outline business case would be created, and in the definition phase is where the project management plan is created. Then we're into the implementation phase, often split into different stages, and here I've just invented design, build and test as an example. Sometimes this is called the execution. No, not of the project manager, but executing the work. And this is where most of the money is being spent and where your deliverables or products are being made. And the final phase is the handover or closeout. So we can see we'd want to split this in some way across management stages. Let's just now discuss and touch on what I mentioned previously, which is the benefits of having an end stage review in some way. Sometimes these are called phase reviews and sometimes they're called gate reviews. And the whole purpose of these is to decide whether or not to continue with the project. And one of the driving thoughts behind this is the business case still viable? And clearly the sponsor at the end of each phase or gate review would need to make a decision whether to approve and allow the project continue to the next stage, to change the project in some way, that might be reducing scope, changing the budget or what have you, or indeed to stop the project. And it's important you understand that if a project gets to an end of a phase or stage and the decision is made to stop, this is a positive thing. Far better to stop a project where the business case is no longer viable, and continuing would merely continue throwing good money after bad. So the benefits of these phase or gate reviews at the end of each stage or phase is to check the business case is and remains viable, to review the project management plan and or stage plans if you're going through one of the stages, to ensure that key deliverables from the stage or phase just finished have met their quality criteria. We'll talk about this later, but a quality criteria would be some set of metrics that a product would need to meet for it to be acceptable to the customer. Think very simply, for example, if you have a favourite dish that you like to prepare and eat, then if I made it for you and put it in front of you, the quality criteria might be the freshness of the vegetables or meat, the temperature it's served at, the spices, the techniques used in preparing it, the way it's laid out on the plate, etc., etc. So all these are quality criteria, and at the end of a phase or gate review, the deliverables, the products if you will, of the phase or stage just finished should be checked to make sure that they comply with their quality criteria and that they have been approved and signed off. Another advantage is that it enables planning horizon problems to be reduced. Now the word planning horizon comes from the point that if you stand at a coastline, for example, you can see to the horizon, something like 3 miles I've been told, but you can't see beyond the horizon. And project planning is somewhat similar. Just like having a house built and not being able to see 9 months out from today, then you may only be able to plan in detail up to the horizon or for the next stage or phase. So it enables planning horizon problems to be reduced. What we mean by this is, if you can't see beyond the horizon, then how can you come up with a realistic plan? And the answer is, you can't. It's got to be approximate. It's got to be best guess beyond the horizon. The other value of phase and gate reviews is that they provide review and decision points. Like I said, like the traffic lights here, do we approve, go forward, change the project in some way or stop it? And the other value of having a stage or gate review is to make sure they're timed before significant budget spend or commitment. For example, again, if you were having a house built, you might want to have a very important review with the builder before the builder starts putting the shell of the house up, which is probably where most of the money is going to be spent. Assists in managing risk. Risky projects would want to be split down into shorter phases or stages, so that each stage you only go a certain point before having an end stage review to decide what the decision is, should it be approved, changed or stopped. Reviews can often use independent audits if they're required. Sometimes in some organisations this is a requirement, so that at the end of a phase or gate review, this is where an independent audit team or an individual could come in and check that the project is being, for example, run to appropriate standards and that the business case, for example, remains viable. The other use of phase and gate reviews is they can facilitate management by exception. Now this is probably a new term for you, so write it down. Management by exception comes from the fact that when you sign off for example, a stage plan, or a project plan, a project management plan, you might have an end date and let's say a budget. Now if that budget is fixed and the end date immovable, then the project manager, when delivering against a project, if they can see at any one point that that budget's going to be exceeded by a small amount, say £1 or £2, or the end date's going to slip by 24 hours, then the project manager no longer has any authority, and it has to be escalated, if you will, to the steering group or the sponsor, and it's up to them to make a decision what to do next. So if you have no tolerance, then every time you're going to be 3 minutes late or overspend by £1 or something, you must escalate it, which is crazy. So what management by exception does, it gives some tolerance band, usually time or cost in projects where that's important, and as long as the project manager sees that this small variance is okay still, and that the project will come in within this small variance, then the project manager can continue to manage it. Whenever that variance is forecast to be exceeded, then the project manager must escalate it. Can you see, it's a bit like giving your child, say, £10 to go and buy something, but giving them another £2, not to be used, but just in case whatever it is they're going to buy is a little more expensive this week. That would be seen as management by exception. But if it's going to be more than 10 plus 2, £12, then your child should come back and discuss it with you. It allows for the fact that in the real world there will always be some small variance in estimates and external situations causing some deviation from an original plan. So it's called management by exception. Don't worry too much about it at this early point. The other benefit I want to talk about is that they can be set, these phase and gate reviews, at key delivery milestones. Indeed, what you'd want to do when creating the project management plan is to choose the key points where you should have or need to have a phase or gate review, where it's important to take stock and to consider, is the business still viable or not. Still keeping to these lifecycle phase activities, so let's now go in a little bit more detail and look at each of these 4 phases, starting off with the concept phase. Now it's important you have an understanding of the type of things that occur in each of these phases. You would gather initial requirements. You would design and appoint the project team, because in the concept phase we obviously need to pull a team together so that when we start delivering we have a team to actually manage. Prepare the project success criteria. Don't worry, we'll cover all of these in a later module. KPIs, key performance indicators, and the business case. We'll discuss these further, but just for now be aware that these need to be determined. And then finally, obtain approval to proceed from the sponsor. So that is then the concept phase finished. We're now into the definition phase. And by the way, this would of course be an end phase review, where this information would be checked to see that it's all in place and that it's worthwhile to proceed to the next phase. So the definition phase is where the various elements or parts of the project management plan are assembled and developed. The project budget is set. The schedule, that's the time frame, the resources we need, human and non-human, and the controls within the project plan are determined. In other words, the whole plan comes together here. Again, the end of this phase, the objective is to obtain approval and funds from the sponsor so we can now start creating the deliverables. And this, of course, is the implementation phase, which, if you remember, you may want to split down into sub-stages, if you will. The project management plan is executed. This means we carry out the work as detailed in the project management plan. Progress is monitored and controlled by taking appropriate actions if and when necessary. The products or deliverables are created and they're quality checked to make sure that they are complete. Now, changes can come at a project from a variety of sources and at any time. That's a change to the original plan, and a term that's used is baseline. It actually comes from configuration management, if you're familiar with that. A baseline is nothing more than an approved something, in this case the plan. But within the plan you'll have things like products, costs, schedule, time frame if you will, etc., etc. And these are all baselined. And therefore, as changes, if they do occur, then the project manager is responsible for making sure that these are managed appropriately. Gate reviews are undertaken if you're splitting this into stages, and at the end of this phase anyway, it will have a gate review, and then this will occur, of course, when all of the deliverables have been created. So we now prepare for handover and closeout, which is the final phase. Here the project's products are confirmed that they meet their acceptance criteria, and they therefore need to be signed off in some way. The project's end product is now handed over to the business as usual area that is going to use it. It might be an external customer. And that we do the bookwork, if you will. The project finance and general administration aspects are now completed. Archiving documents, for example, updating the project management plan with the final costs, for example. And the project manager will want to conduct a post-project review. We'll discuss that when we look at this phase in more detail. Right, well I want to take a break from talking about projects just for a few slides and talk about program management. Now this is a part of the syllabus that you need to understand. And basically you need to be able to define what a program is and what program management is. So let's start with the first. Program management is the coordinated management of related projects. Let's stop there. Some people get confused and think that a program is merely a big, large project or just a basket or a bucket of projects linked together. And this is not true. However, programs do have projects within them, which may include related business as usual activities that come together to achieve a beneficial change, usually of a strategic nature for an organization. Programs, therefore, are different from projects in that they have a vision of some end state but no clearly defined path of getting there. The analogy I like to use is that of a research and development nature. You might, for example, have a research program trying to find some new technology. Well, clearly you wouldn't know what it was at the beginning, otherwise you could just produce a project and deliver it right here and now. So a project within a program would perhaps start off by gathering data and trying to find evidence. Another project may be looking at different techniques and procedures, and so on and so forth. I suppose in a medical example, where you have talented medical researchers trying to find a drug or a procedure to help cure a particular illness or ailment. At the very beginning, they have no idea what the solution is. So that would be seen as a program, not as a project. Now, the program manager's focus is on facilitating and leading change, and on the project interdependencies, including resource allocation. I like to sort of describe this as a series of islands. So if you can imagine looking down from space on a little group of islands at some part in the world, each island would be its own project, with its own governor, its own rules, its own provision of food and shelter, and so on and so forth. And you'd want to allow the people on the island to manage them themselves. whereas the program manager will be looking at interdependencies. For example, are the shipping lanes open? Are there goods and services coming to the different islands? Have they got an interrelated method of communicating, and so on and so forth? So the program manager will be looking at the interdependencies of the islands, not getting involved in running the islands, but making sure the group of islands are thriving as required. Now, within a program, you can see it's not just the sum total of projects. It may also include parts of your business as usual. In other words, the operational parts of your current organization, along with projects that need to be coordinated in some way. The strategic nature might be a full redesign, a reorganization of your organization, where people get different jobs, you structure the organization in different places, and so on. And that would be an example of a program. If you take large projects, which you may have heard of, in England I'm thinking of the Channel Tunnel, some many years ago now. That was a project because it had a set of objectives, had a beginning and an end date, and it was clear what we needed to do. So even though that cost many millions of pounds, was a very dangerous, high risky and very complex project, it was still a project, not a program. So what constitutes a program will vary across industries and business sectors, but there are core program management processes. If you're interested in learning more about this, there's even a methodology called Managing Successful Programs, which you may want to check into, for those that are involved with running programs. But for now, you only need to understand the definition. So what are the characteristics of a program? Well, often driven by your internal and external business environment, either as a result of implementing new business initiatives, implementing business strategies, or implementing business policies. As a result of some or all of these need to be defined, scoped, you know what that means now, and prioritized. You see, managing a program is often about making these prioritizations, usually within resource constraints. So the program is now, just like a project, implemented and ultimately delivered. Now, programs are chosen when you need to implement major change, where there is complexity, high levels of risk, many interdependencies, and conflicting priorities. It therefore makes sense that programs are usually sponsored from the highest level within an organization, so that these conflicts and risks can be driven downwards and managed appropriately. Programs need to be managed in a coordinated fashion. The activities within the projects and within the program need to be coordinated, and these need to be liaised, harmonized as you're changing business as usual. Programs realize benefits of strategic importance, and these benefits will occur both during the program and after. Typically, a project will realize its benefits after the project's end products or end deliverables have been delivered into business as usual. But programs very often have benefits delivered and realized while the program's still ongoing. The program delivers the required outcomes. Remember that word again, it's as a result of change. And the products or deliverables from the project are embedded into business as usual. The projects need to be coordinated. Now, I haven't gone into too much detail in this because we don't need to, but coordinating projects may talk about coordinating the resources, timing, products, and so on and so forth. And the result of this is that programs manage outcomes, whereas projects, of course, are there to create an end product. Another term you need to be familiar with is portfolio management. And it's important to understand that portfolios are often needed because of resource constraints. When you have an organization, you have certain constraints about how many people you've got, and that when you've got many projects, programs and business as usual requirements, then there needs to be some prioritization. So portfolios are often used when you need to manage those interactions. So portfolio management is the selection and management of all of an organization's projects, programs, and any related business as usual activities taking into account resource constraints. That's the main value I want you to see here. Why would you want to manage a portfolio? It may be to do with harmonization, but ultimately it's to make sure you can get the job done within constraints. Sometimes that leads to you needing to make tough decisions. A portfolio, therefore, is a group of projects and programs carried out under the sponsorship of an organization. Portfolios can be managed at several levels. Having said an organization, it might be the whole organization, or it might be a department or a group within the organization. So portfolios can occur at the highest organization level, at program or at functional or departmental level. So portfolios can be any one of those. Portfolios are concerned with the management of the interdependencies between the projects and the programs. And the main reason why you'd want to run this as a portfolio is to do with timing, where the products of projects and programs need to be coordinated and occur in strict rotation or a certain time, where due to resources or capacity bottlenecks to make sure that you've got sufficient people at sufficient times. And I'm talking about people here. Resources could be non-human. For example, the availability of meeting rooms or of certain pieces of equipment or production facilities. And they're there to balance between the risk and the return, the benefits, if you will. And because portfolios have often a common theme of whatever the portfolio is to do with, and not therefore a common goal, because within it you have projects and programs and business as usual, all with different goals, then the priorities for management are different. And that's one of the advantages of managing such undertakings in the form of a portfolio. So let's look at a portfolio structure. So up here we have strategic objectives and targets of an organization, strategic benefits that you're looking to achieve, often used by senior management seeking a mix of projects and programs to deliver strategic objectives when constrained by limited resources. Imagine an organization changing the way it delivers its products and services. Then this would be quite a massive upheaval, and there may be projects to implement different training or different systems or different tools, and there may be programs undergoing to change the skills that's needed to run the organization. So while all those are going on, there are obviously lots of conflicts, and you're certainly constrained by limited resources. This is where a portfolio could be used. So within a portfolio you might have one or more programs. Here's program A, and within programs you have many projects. Here as an example is project A and B. These could be sub-projects within projects, be seen as work packages within a project. Here's program B, again with different projects in it, shown here as C and D, and you may have projects just stand alone. That's the point of this diagram. A portfolio consists of programs, but also it may be standalone projects, as shown in this case by project E. However, portfolios also have to interact with business as usual. Again, these limited resources you might be drawing upon the resources of your standard staff you're using to deliver business as usual, and these staff may be needed to come on board to these programs or projects. The whole thing therefore together is called portfolio management. So what you should now be able to understand is the definition of a project, of a project manager, of the different performance criteria. You know about life cycles, phases and stages. You know about programs and how they differ from projects, and something called portfolios, a mix of just about everything we've talked about thus far. Well, okay, that brings us nicely to the end of this first module. So thank you for your company, and I hope you'll join me for module 2.